Hi there. Welcome. Happy half hour. We're so glad that you joined us. I hope you're joining us for the first time or again. Obviously, it's got to be one, right? And I always start this off with this is just a little piece of the wonderful Museum of Broadcast Communication, one of the artifacts that we have. And it's here with me in quarantine because, of course, the museum is not yet open. But great news, wonderful news. If you haven't read it already, if you haven't been, everybody's talking about it, people. We are opening up on the 24th. We're very excited. We're going to be opening up for weekends. So it'll be limited hours. It'll be 11 to 5 on Friday, 11 to 5 on Saturday, and noon to 5 on Sunday. And our Stay Tuned exhibit, which is from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is the story of television and rock and roll and how these two industries in the 50s, rock and roll looked around and said, hey, these young people really like this stuff, and we're going to need them if we're going to be an industry that goes into the future. So they glommed onto rock and roll and how they were able to elevate individual musicians as well as the whole industry. So it's a fascinating, there's a lot of music, there's a lot of artifacts. It's a really kind of a fun exhibit to come to, and it's a particularly fun one for families in that you can teach your kids about the music you grew up with, and they can actually talk about whether or not they like it, or it's a great conversation. And in Chicago, we have so much here from in this exhibit that we helped with. We have many stars, many names, and we have a whole part. We have a big sign from Soul Train, which of course originated here in Chicago at WCIU. So you'll be able to see that, and you'll also be able to see all of our tribute to a kind of a taste of Chicago TV, as well as the Radio Hall of Fame. And we're very excited. We're going to be opening up voting for the Radio Hall of Fame for this year's inductees very soon. So you have to look on our website, and it will be there. And I think that's all. The other thing I wanted to tell you about is don't forget we have a membership that is still open for anyone across the country, and that is going to be something for $49. Not only will you be privy to a whole host of different things, including any of our online programming and classes, but we're also going to give you 70 free old time radio shows, which maybe not all of you know that you need to listen to these. These are some of the classics, thanks to one of our board members, Carl Amari, and they will be delivered to you free for the cost of a 1 year membership. The other thing we wanted to tell you about was remember, greatdebates.org is a website that is up. If you're a teacher, if you have a child in school, this is a marvelous website that we have designed to use for teachers to use in the classroom to really talk about what is going on in this presidential election. What we do is we talk about how the broadcast industry has continually, as it has evolved, disrupted so many other industries. The ripple effect has been huge. And one of the more interesting places that we see a big ripple effect is within the debate process in the presidential elections. So we have curriculum there that's free. Please make sure to tell your favorite teacher or your favorite relative who's a teacher that it is there. It really takes into consideration. We scrambled to rewrite everything during this pandemic, and we actually have a whole module on the pandemic and how the candidates are handling it and how things are affected by this. So one of the other things, one of the other modules, we have 5 modules up there. 4 modules are coming, and that'll be ready for all the teachers who want to use this in August or September as we move towards the election. And one of the modules is going to be about race, which is, of course, a key issue that we're not only dealing with the pandemic, we are dealing with, the resurgence of the civil rights movement in the United States, and all of the things that we have and have not done. So we're very excited to be part of that discussion and to help teachers lead that discussion. And one of the discussions that we're going to have here today is we're going to turn to, broadcasting, as we talk about it at the museum, is not only radio and television, but it is also digital, and where things are streaming. And one of the big things besides programming that we see and that affects us is advertising. Advertising has, I spent so much time talking about advertising in other iterations of my life. And most people will tell me when I wrote about it that it doesn't affect them at all. It doesn't affect them at all. And yet, if I started singing one of 20 jingles, my guess is all of you would be able to fulsomely finish it. Advertising actually is something that is a huge industry, and it's a huge industry because it does affect us. And we are lucky to have three amazing people who are part of the advertising industry. We have Vijay. Vijay, welcome. Vijay Rangathan. I did that wrong, didn't
Ranganathan.
I? Raganathan. I'm so sorry.
That's all
You're a
right.
senior strategist at Legacy. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
That's correct. That's wonderful. And then we have Faith. Faith Vangsuvan, who is with
Yep,
us,
that's
and
it.
she's also with, yes, with Legacy. And we are, you're an art director, is that correct?
Mhm.
Yes, great. And then we have Nick Daughtry. He is an associate and creative director, and he's at FCB. Is that correct?
I'm also at Legacy, actually.
I am so sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm mixing up things. But you're all in advertising. Is that correct? And you are at Legacy. And Faith, you're at FCB. Is that correct?
No, I'm freelancing.
You're okay. Well, there we go. I've mangled that totally. So it's a very good beginning. But you're all together here because you have a project that you've been doing. And I would love for one of you to talk overall about the project. It's a special website, right?
Yeah, and Nick, since you were kind of the spearhead of that, do you want to go first?
Yeah. Um, so, with everything going on in this country, whether it's this pandemic or this really injustice that's happening across the country to people of color, and being from the outside of it, really, like I don't have direct experience with this, but I have many friends that have had these situations and instances where they feel uncomfortable or had something happen to them. And with all this spearheading and all this information coming out at all different angles across the internet, um, I just tapped my team internally as a project outside of work to really create an initiative to consolidate all of this information to help the people that want to help. Since there is funds and donations and GoFundMe's and various charities across the country, we wanted to create like a hub that made it easy for people that wanted to help, where they're not falling into these random holes of
So
false information.
tell me the name of the website. I think that'll bring a little more clarity to people.
Oh yeah, the name of the website is Blacklist.
Blacklist. And it is a list of places that you can go to support if you are really key on supporting Black Lives Matter, correct? And not just the
Not only
institution, but really the movement of hashtag Black Lives Matter, and not just the organizations of Black Lives Matter, correct?
correct, correct. Black Lives Matter is one of the smaller touch points on there. We really wanted to create a site that contained information that helped you locally. So we have pages that are per state or per city, even that go down the hole of finding places that you can help your local community, or even just support the national movement if you want to help in a broader sense.
I think that there is but and I want any of you to correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a difference between Black Lives Matter, the organization, and the various chapters in different places. I'm not sure if they're called chapters, but there's also the difference between that and really the civil rights movement of hashtag Black Lives Matter, which is all lives really don't matter until Black lives do matter, and and until injustice and treatment is equal. And I think that those are human rights issues, and that allows us. The site that you have put together really talks about how where we can go. I think there's so many people who are desperate to do something. Some people who don't know how to. They can't march. They feel like they have to still remain quarantined because they might be vulnerable with their health. But this is a way we can put our money where our beliefs are. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's one of the main points we made too. It's like putting your money where your mouth is. You can only do so much for social, posting it is, yes, you might get tons of awareness and responses through that, but that's not really what's driving the cause. You need to fund it. You need to go out and do something, and I think that's really what we wanted to focus on with that throughout the site.
I think that is it. And I would love for you each to talk a little bit about your experiencing, because you're in advertising, and the companies that you have been with or are with right now or are freelancing with, they are big companies that actually drive some of the social um, awareness, because advertising is with us everywhere. It's throughout radio, television, billboards, you name it. It's in our pocket. We're getting it all the time. And I would love to have you talk a little bit, because each of you came to this in a different way. Is that correct? Yeah.
Correct.
And so, Vicky, maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and maybe Faith could go next, and then we'll go back to Nick. So, how
Sure.
is it
So for me, go ahead.
you go?
Um, for me, it was, for the site specifically, coming from a different minority perspective and one that has a complicated relationship with other minorities. Um, I wanted to make sure that I was able to become a better ally myself for the Black Lives Matter movement. And I live with immunocompromised parents, so I knew that I wouldn't be able to march, but I wanted to do something more than, education being passive and just donating to the organizations that I knew, because truth be told, there's a lot of organizations that are getting a lot of funding just because they're spreading broader awareness. But one of the
Mhm.
reasons I was really excited to work on the site is because it's shedding light on organizations that are not getting the funding that they might need, but are helping to promote various facets of the movement and promote the kind of equity of the Black community in different ways. So it was really important for me to work on this because it was education for me as well, as someone who comes from a different background, and it was also a way for me to feel like I was contributing to the movement in a more tangible way. So, it's something that's still ongoing. I think that the key point of the site is that it's something that isn't necessarily going to, I mean, parts of the site will be evergreen for sure. But for us, it was important that, we've been keeping an eye on it to make sure that what we're posting is still true to the movement. The places that need donations, we've been adding more as we go, making sure that people have a true real time resource to go to, because I'm one, like Nick was saying before, people who didn't necessarily know where to start. I was one of them. So the
Yep.
process of creating and contributing to the site really helped me understand just the broad scope of the movement and just how many places we could affect.
And in a sense as well, you're also helping those of us who might not know. You're vetting some of this for us, in that you are saying this is really I think people look at what has happened, and I do see it as an explosion of again, the civil rights movement, because we did not accomplish the civil rights in the 60s or throughout the things that needed to be accomplished, justice. And the museum is located at 360 North State Street. We're kind of we were at a very key point for where a lot of the protests were congregated, because we're across the away from Trump Tower, and many people, of course, were protesting there. And I thought our experience with protesters was emblematic of some of what people were seeing. We did have a tire iron that was thrown through a window and broke it, so there was violence, right? But in front of the museum, that same day, that same evening that was thrown, was this incredibly beautiful. And it was very long. It went in down the street on the sidewalk, chalk drawings and writings, beautiful pictures, and beautiful hashtags about who about people who had died and that there should be justice for, but also sayings such as, "If we look for peace, we will find justice." They brought tears to my eyes, Lord. So when people think about the protests, very often they bring up violence, because violence is something that, it's news and it sticks in our head. But this is a movement about justice. This is a movement about making sure that people are treated with respect and dignity, and that's what people are out there marching for all the time. It's not is that isn't that I don't know, Faith, if that's the way I'm saying it, but tell me a little bit about how you came to this as well.
Yeah, so of course, I'm a Black woman. I'm also Asian. I'm also disabled and immunocompromised. I'm also queer. So I was hoping that our site would be able to cover a few bases other than bail funds, which is what a lot of people were amplifying, and those are very much needed. But we were also able to include mental health resources for Black folks and people of color. We were able to include resources for Black queer people because we know that when they're incarcerated, it's far more dangerous for them. And also organizations working towards prison reform and prison abolition. So it wasn't just bail funds, it was a bit of everything and making sure that these people are supported in other ways, not just financially, but also with food and with their mental health.
Which is it's just crucial because, of course, people of color are, we know the statistics are there, are much more affected by this pandemic, as you know, and this whole complication of things. Nick, could you talk a little bit about how how you think this site is going, and do you think that it has reached people? Is it something that you see as has had an effect?
Um, yeah, I definitely think so. I think it has made an effect, and I've definitely heard a lot from people around us about um, how helpful of a resource it is and how it's been shared across various communities, whether that is through social or just word of mouth of your friends that are around you. And it's like an ongoing process, right? It's continually changing. The search for justice is there's not really an end to it. I feel like right now, so we have to stay on our toes and keep moving forward and keep progressing it um, to make it us better as a community as a whole, um, and specifically minorities currently, just because they're in our our line of work. We work with them side by side. We have extremely diverse teams in advertising. In my cases, anyways, where I've worked at either at Havas or the Annex, and my creative team at Legacy was extremely diverse. So it's fighting for your friends. It's just like it's common sense to me.
Mhm. So you're all in advertising, and we at the museum have really, in the years that the museum has been open, 30 years, it's talked a little bit about the impact of advertising on society. And when advertising comes through, which comes through the broadcast industry, you know, how it comes into our homes and as I said, into our pockets now. And we look at advertising, and advertising can be part of the problem, right? It capitalizes on stereotypes. You know, we saw the Aunt Jemima stereotype go away. It's been with us for how long? But we just had that announced that that would no longer be. And here we are in, you know, in the year 2020, and we still have food that's being, you know, promoted by a symbol of slavery. So we can look at the problems there, and yet we can also look at it as an industry that also solves problems and tries to step in, you know, with PSAs, etc., to bring awareness. So I'm wondering, you know, that juxtaposition of do you live the idea that the industry that you're in can be part of the problem?
I definitely think so because I come from a community for which advertising and communications is new as a discipline. A lot of the Asian community, my family included, doesn't quite understand what I do for a living, and for me, it's hard to explain to them that advertising hasn't been part of the problem because it really has. Even for our own community and other communities of color, when my parents first moved here, a lot of what we learned from other cultures and the way that society worked came from the media and came from advertising, and a lot
Mhm.
of those stereotypes or biases that came from advertising kind of stuck with the community because that was really all that was their form of education. So part of what I try to do as a strategist is, you know, understand where some of those stereotypes and biases come from And
Mhm.
through communications, just because advertising can be such a powerful medium, especially right now when we have more time to pay attention to the things we usually tend to tune out, it's really
Right.
important that we make sure that our efforts are not propagating some of the kind of negative learnings we have or negative assumptions we have about communities that we don't necessarily understand. So I think right now, I mean, historically, advertising has certainly been part of the problem. But I think now it's in a unique position to become part of the solution just because it has so much more influence now than it ever did.
Yeah. And we're kind of stuck at home with it. Miss Faith, is that a same the same thing that you especially being a queer woman that is not exactly something a disabled woman that is not. Those are not areas that advertising has definitely uplifted over the years. So do you see the problems of the industry and also see it as a solution?
Yeah, definitely echoing what Vidya says. I've definitely seen a lot of misrepresentation for many marginalized groups. Thankfully, recently, I've noticed more representation for women of color. I've seen more interracial um, couples in advertising and more positive and a less, um, it's less jarring, I think, to people that are around my age, people fresh out of college and teenagers. But I also remember professors kind of showing us advertising with an interracial couple and being like, look at this, this is iconic and things
Right.
like that. And it's interesting to see that my parents, of course, were in an interracial relationship. So seeing things that I always were just saw as part of my life kind of being put up on a pedestal as like an accomplishment was weird because it's not really an accomplishment. It's kind of embarrassing that it's taken so long for certain groups and certain families to feel represented on TV and in media in general.
Mhm. It's so true, and it is so so key and important, I think, for young people, younger than you all, um, but young people to be able to see themselves. Because when you begin to see yourself on screen and in the normal things, you begin to envision yourself there or at whatever height is there. And without that, you find less of the ability to kind of dream, which is, which is just that's very hard, especially in communities where there's poverty, communities of color where there's poverty, but inability to dream just kind of
Mhm.
works with a lot of kids in different neighborhoods. And when you say, "So, what do you want to do if you won the lottery today? What do you want to do?" And some of the kids, and I've done this at least 4 times in different exercises, and the answers are bone chillingly the same, which is, well, I would just buy the block my family lives on and stay here. Would you want to travel? No. Why would I want to travel? Those would be people who might not accept me because that's the experience. I see that these are not people like me that I'm seeing in different places. So where do you see, what do you see? This site is going to stay around. It's not going to be, it's not just a flash in the pan. It's something you want to keep going. Do you have other colleagues in the industry who are supporting this? And what do you see the future for this? That it could be maybe a place to have dialogue or what? The website.
Nick, do you want to speak to that more?
Yeah. So um, my goal was just to really inform and educate and work within this situation to get this information in people's hands. As we work through it, we have been building sections to the site. Conversation is not something I've focused on around it. I feel like that's something that's a one for one or more of a social interaction. My whole goal with this was really to drive education and awareness of the causes around the country and be able to find your local needs. Um, so for me, I think that's really where we're driving it, and obviously that's a growing piece as things change daily, as protests change, as messaging changes. I think we just are focusing in that area um, more than just creating a dialogue on the site itself.
Got it. Got it. Got it. So can I throw you all a little curveball and ask you a little bit? Think that we are concentrating at the museum with our Great Debate site on the presidential election. And no, the stakes are very high in this presidential election, and yet we pretty much will probably, we know now we won't have a Democratic convention. We will probably have a Republican convention. And so the burden on advertising in this campaign is huge. Um, can I ask you to, have you been looking at some of the advertising that's coming out from candidates as well as the different groups that are supporting or against them? And what do you think about this level of discourse on the presidential advertising?
I think
Let me go up.
adver-
Go ahead.
oh, no, please. I was just going to say, I think advertising has played a bigger role in the past couple of elections than it ever has, just because the various methods of advertising have changed. Now, it used to be, you get a phone call, you get an email, but now it's text messages. Now it's Facebook ads. It's almost like you see it as this ubiquitous source of information from both sides. And in some ways it's good, because I think people are more politically educated, especially young people. They're more politically educated than they ever were, so they're able to make more informed decisions about who to elect, and how to make their vote count. It's also, from my own experience, it's interesting if you don't have access to platforms on both sides, just to see how each side is communicating. It's very easy to develop biases toward one platform over another, or one party over another. So I've purposely, and this has actually caused some detriment because my phone is now blowing up all the time, but I've actually subscribed to messaging and emails from both sides of the debates in both political parties, just because I want to see how the communication is different, especially if the debate is about the same issue. Because, for us as advertisers, the way that we communicate is often even more important than what we're communicating. So it's been interesting for me to see how those, depending on where the message is coming from, how it's different.
Yeah, it's very. I mean, and advertising has been so crucial in presidential elections. I mean, I think the was the LBJ ad that was shown about an atomic bomb was so controversial, and it was a little girl picking a flower, a daisy, and in the back you hear them counting down to the launch of a nuclear weapon, and then as it explodes, it goes into her eye, and you kind of see the launch. That was so controversial at the time that they never really aired it. They aired it once, but because it created such a discourse, it was shown on all these news programs, and that was one of the considered a big step into the very dramatic negative ads. And we're seeing a lot of negative ads. Faith, are you keeping up at all with any of the presidential stuff? Are you? It's hard not to, really.
Yeah, yeah. Similar to Vidya, I'm also subscribed to get emails and texts from both sides, just so again, to see how they're communicating to their constituents separately. And it's interesting. I had a former professor who worked on a campaign, and he would talk about how much he hated it, but he never told us whose campaign it was. And this recent time being laid off during a pandemic and getting job offers, I was offered a job to work on a presidential campaign um,
Oh,
about last month, and I like refused it very quickly because I think it's a lot of pressure. And I don't think we ever will get to know the person that we are electing. And I think that's just a lot of weight to bear if you have any part in creating the messaging or the visuals on behalf of that politician. I don't think I could ever do it personally.
it does sound like it sounds like a huge and daunting job. And you're right to we get a lot of people telling us at the museum, why do you talk about digital stuff? Because of course that's where broadcasting is now. It's not just on television and radio. It's not. It's exactly what you guys are talking about, which is it's the text, it's the Facebook, it's the Instagram, or it's the TikTok, or it's whatever. And Nick, what about you? What do you see in the presidential race? This is my curveball, I know, but um,
So unlike them, Vid and Faith, I am not subscribed to either of them. I refuse to have any of the messaging pushed at me because it's so contradictory of each other in many cases, and the information relayed through it is just I don't feel as truthful on either side of it. Obviously, more Republican than anything. You can't really agree with right now with the craziness that changes every hour. Um, but I have distanced myself from it. I obviously have tons of podcasts and news sources that I read daily in the morning as I start my day. But I refuse to have direct campaign information pushed at me at any point in time. I feel like it's one of those dirty forms of advertising, and I've worked on liquor, I've worked on cigarettes in my career. And I feel like um, politics is on a completely different level than any of that.
Yeah, I've had family and covered politics and had family in politics, and it is its own little unique animal.
It
But
is.
it also is what I find interesting is that I love that the two of you are getting all this stuff and absorbing all this stuff to be able to hear what is said. I think that sometimes what I hear from some of the students that I've had when I've been teaching is the turnoff part, which is I don't want to hear any of it, I don't believe any of it, and so that leads to almost a withdrawal from civic engagement, and we suffer without your voices. I mean, certainly the young people that I know who have said, "I'm not even getting part of this whole discourse." And it's like, well, your voices are so important. This is going to be your country, longer than it's going to be mine, because I'm afraid that I'm going to be shuffling off this mortal coil way before you guys are. So, do you see that where we are right now has actually engaged people more in the election or less?
I've
um,
definitely noticed more engagement from the people around me. I come from an immigrant background. My family were refugees. So for the longest time, I think they had the mindset that they were just thankful to be here and they were not going to complain. But I think as things have progressed, as we have the president we have now, I've seen them become more politically active than before. Some of them voting for the first time in the last couple years. And currently, I'm home visiting family, and I'm seeing my younger sisters who are in high school losing friends because of political beliefs. And I don't think that never happened to me in high school, at least. Having conversations that were at that caliber. At least when I was in high school, I don't think having a friend with different political beliefs was that big of a deal than I think it is now. There's definitely a greater divide in people who weren't as people who didn't think they were affected before. I think they're feeling it now.
Yeah. And I said
there's definitely a
individuals.
line. There's definitely a line in the sand now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're
I,
right.
I mean, even for my parents, because my family and a lot of the Indian community that came here in the 80s and 70s and 80s have had more conservative beliefs just because India as a nation at the time was a more conservative country. So their belief systems sort of aligned. But our generation and my generation, just by nature of everything that's gone on in the country and the sort of ideals that we've had instilled in us having been born here, it's actually changed a lot of the older community's beliefs. They're no longer aligning to a party just because they feel like they have to be loyal to a party. They are now taking a closer look at their specific belief systems and being more active in who they support because that person aligns with their beliefs rather than I've been a Republican, I'm always going to be a Republican, so I'm going to support the Republican Party, which is a really interesting transition for me to have seen in the last 4 or 5 years for sure.
That's fascinating. That is fascinating. So I love and I love that the label on that, it doesn't fit anymore. The labels just don't fit anymore. And I think this is going to be, let's see if I can transition this way. Um, but I want one of you to talk about the specific name of your site and where that label came and how you have grabbed it to change it into a positive.
Nick, since that really came from you, do you want to talk to it?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Yeah, so as we were like working together and really thinking of this, we're trying to think of ways of like what the norm was, right? Where you really combat the system or say something that's out of line, and you kind of get blacklisted, and people would get put to the side, and you'd kind of be canceled. We wanted to take that meaning and kind of flip it on its head with everything else changing currently, and really push it forward and give it a new meaning. So blacklist is literally promoting positivity and change rather than thinking of canceling someone or shutting them out, like the old terminology of it really kind of conveyed.
Yeah, and it was certainly one that was came to the public discourse, and we became very much aware of it during the McCarthy era,
Hmm.
when artists and a lot of people in the broadcast industry, a lot of people in the film industry, television industry, because they were perceived to have much more left leaning and communist views, they were actually blacklisted, and were put on a list where they would not be. You cannot work here. We will not employ you. We will not do anything with you. So yeah, so I love that that it's pushing the positive on all of this. And does this has this taken a lot of your time? Is this something, or are you just so talented you guys could whip this off in no trouble at all?
It
I'll
actually
take the
came
with
together really quickly. Oh, yeah, go for it.
no, it's all you, bit. I was just gonna take her compliment and spread it across all of us. It came together quickly though, but it was a lot of long hours for all of us. I think Vid definitely did some really heavy lifting, and I think it was just a way of really using our skills to our best ability. Like advertising is something that you have to be adaptable in, and I think this is something that we like really leaned into and showed how we can work.
I think that's great. I think it's really wonderful. I am so happy and glad that you joined us today. And I think that this is a precursor to the fact that we're going to maybe have a deeper conversation with the whole crew in August about advertising and politics and the effect and the history as well. But until then, I would like you to not only visit the site that these three amazing people have built, and I would also like you to visit the museum, which will open again on July 24th. And I'm going to toast all of you one more time. And thank you so very much for being with us for this happy half hour. We're here on Tuesdays, and on Fridays, we'll be discussing reality TV on Instagram at Museum TV with my colleagues Olivia and Aileen. They are always having fun, and it's always a nice, it's actually a nice cocktail hour to listen to them discuss reality TV. So, and we'll be looking for some more programming, workshops, etc. Please keep up with our website. Please join and get a membership so that you can be one of the first to know about our classes. Last night we had a very big class that we did with the History Center, and it was the other night, and it was all about obituary writing with Maureen O'Donnell. We plan to have different writing classes and different skill classes as we go along in the next couple months. So please join us, and thank you very much for being here today.